Over the 20 years since the Boston Club first started tracking women's roles at the biggest companies in Massachusetts, there's been a lot of movement in the right direction. As the latest report just out today found, the top 100 public companies in the state hit multiple new records in increasing the number of women and people of diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds in top leadership roles. For example, in 2003, when the report first came out, just 9.2% of the executive officers at these 100 companies were women. In 2013, that number was 10.8%. As for this year, well, let's bring in my guest for the big reveal and to talk about where there's still plenty of room for improvement. Co-authors Toni, Wolfman, and Patricia Flynn started this census 20 years ago, and this one is the last for both of them. We'll talk about that in a minute. Toni's also former chair of the Boston Club's Corporate Board Committee, and Pat is a professor of economics and management at Bentley University. Pat, Toni, congratulations. Good to see you both.
Thank you. Nice to be here as well.
You as well. Let me fill in a couple of blanks if I can. I started with those, the percentage of women executive officers, 9.2% in 03, 10 years later, 10.8%, double that number in the most recent report, 21.5. Let's go to women directors, if we can, for a second. 9% 20 years ago, 13.8% in 2013, and a more than doubling this year to 29.6%. Toni, starting with you, why the progress? What do you attribute it to?
Well, I think, first of all, the progress has really been in this last decade. The first decade, things moved very slowly. And I think it took a while through education, advocacy, and the like to get boards, nominating committees, and also CEOs to understand the importance of diversity at the top in terms of what it does to the dynamics of decision making. But I think in the last several years, you had certainly the racial reckoning after George Floyd's death. And I think that was the big trigger for the most recent changes with more directors of color joining the boards of these companies. Longer term, it was the clout of the institutional investors, I think. Money talks, and even before BlackRock and State Street got involved, we have, particularly in Boston, outfits like Trillium, Walden, a number of socially responsible investors who were acting to change the landscape. Steve Grossman, Deb Goldberg.
Treasurers, but Pat, if I can, getting back to what Toni said, have they learned how important diversity is? And we're going to get to the issue of people of color in a minute, but how important diversity is both internally and to their bottom line? Or is this more a case of sunshine being the best, not disinfectant, but incentive to do good things, or otherwise you get pretty badly embarrassed?
Right. Well, we didn't do a survey of that nature, but I would hope that it's certainly the first, that the message has certainly changed. And it's not just coming from one or two places. It's really coming from a variety of different groups. And I think, too, that they start to see that, when we started, 50 of these companies had no women, 50 out of 100. So, this year we're close, almost all of them. But I think once you get one, even having been the first woman on a couple of boards, I can tell you it really changes the nature of the conversation. So I think partially when it started, they might have been, what's this going to bring to us? How are we going to react?
But they get it now.
Different views, different sources of information, that I think that really helps the case.
Toni, I want to go to directors of color, and this is also from your current report. White men, 59%, white women, 23%, men of color, 11.1%, women of color, 6.6%. I know those stats for particularly women of color are up dramatically. They're still pitiful, I should say. Is your sense that on this front, we're going to continue to see the kind of, I guess, rapid progress, not enough, but rapid progress that we've seen during the last decade?
I don't know how rapid. The bottom line changes with the rate at which there are, that openings are filled. And over the last several years, women, and particularly women of color, have been elected to those vacancies. Sometimes boards have been expanded, but often it's just taking the place of retiring directors. I think it will continue because I think as boards, nominating committees become more familiar with the vast talent pool out there, and they've learned a lot over the last decade as to how to source candidates. They don't rely as much on their narrow personal networks. And you have more and more women and people of color becoming corporate executives at the top. So if you look at our report, when we list the women who are executive officers in these companies, many other companies will look at that and say, well, here's even local talent who we might talk to.
You know, Pat, I don't know if one of you created one of my favorite terms that I never heard before you two, 0-0. Who came up with that?
I don't know.
The best.
Who came up with that?
It for several years just amongst ourselves. We used to, when we'd be in meetings, we'd go 0-0.
Does any set of words say exactly what something is? Meaning 0 women in the executive suite, 0 on the board. When you started this, there were 35 companies out of that 100 who were 0-0s, went down to 26 in a decade. There's only 1 this year. What is the 1, by the way, and what's their excuse, Pat?
Global partners.
And what's their problem?
Well, they've had women before in both
Oh, well, that's
positions.
plenty. We don't need them now, as long as we had them in the past, right?
They actually had some people leave. And so it's not that they've always had 0-0. And I know they do have some executive officers that are not included in the SEC database that we use on collecting this information.
Okay. So,
but they still have currently they have no women on their board, but they, as I understand it, they are actively looking.
I'm sure they are. Can we talk about the future just for a minute, about external forces? Boston now has, for exactly a year, a woman mayor, first time ever. We have a woman governor-elect, first time ever. 5 out of 6 women constitutional officers, first time ever. Does that put even more pressure on these companies that do business here, Toni, to diversify their boards for, I think, pretty obvious reasons? Does it?
I don't know, but they certainly are visible. And I think just the fact that these women are so visible and so powerful sends messages to everyone. And I think an important constituency, quite honestly, are the women coming up who are starting to see themselves or see others like themselves in positions of authority. Hey, all right, maybe I can do it too. Yeah. And I think there's internal pressure in companies as well. We want to see people like ourselves at the top.
You know, Pat, I am a mandate kind of guy. I know a lot of people aren't. And my attitude is you give entities, individuals, organizations a chance to do the right thing. And if they move too slowly, then government's got to be involved. I'm sure you know better than I. The European Union just passed a measure that required their members have a certain percentage, I think it's 40% of women on boards by 2026. Some individual Western European countries, the same. California had such a provision until it was struck down recently. Are mandates, I know corporations don't like mandates. Is that ever discussed as sort of the stick that's hanging out there if the carrot doesn't work?
Well, I think, as you said, some of the mandates were struck down. So I don't think we can depend on that happening and being consistent. But I do think the fact that, say, the Boston Globe and the BBJ and other newspapers and magazines have highlighted the 0-0s that you said, or highlighted companies that only had one for long periods of time. So I think that is more pressure than necessarily hoping the government's going to come up with something that doesn't get struck down, you know, a year later. Well,
you know, by the way, before you continue, Toni, I should just say, Pat, based on what you said, Shirley Leung at the Globe has been all over this, in great part thanks to you. But the issue in general, nobody has been more relentless than
she really has.
Shirley. You know,
yes, she has. Absolutely.
Great.
Now, I was going to say the kind of mandate that I support is mandatory disclosure. such as this new
Great idea.
NASDAQ rule, because you're forcing companies to be public about the composition of their boards in ways that all of us can understand. And when they have to grapple with that and they see the gaps, they're going to think twice about it, and I think become more intentional.
You know, Toni, staying with you, there was a time before he was governor that Charlie Baker was in the dreaded private sector. He was obviously head of Harvard Pilgrim, and he has told me on more than one occasion, I know he chaired the corporate advisory board for the Boston Club, but he's gone out of his way to say something I wasn't aware of, that you all helped him find women to sit on the board of Harvard Pilgrim. So it's not just this report, it's actually finding individuals to fill these spaces that you guys have been really helpful with.
The Boston Club has been doing that since the 1990s. You know,
But I
at a
think
time
it's
when no one
expanded
was
a lot
doing it.
because the word's getting out.
Yeah.
Yes.
The word's getting out, and more women know that this database exists. And so they are contacting the Boston Club and saying, hey, I would really like to be considered for some boards. So I think we're now getting a lot more people adding their names to the database, which has also been very helpful.
By the way, this is not binders full of women, if that's what people are thinking about.
What?
Before you go, this is it for you two. What's the deal? Why are you leaving? Toni, starting with you.
Oh, I'm leaving because Pat's leaving. No, honestly.
And Pat, why are you
I can't
leaving?
imagine working with another party.
Pat?
I'm actually leaving because I'm retiring from Bentley. I have been there 47 years.
Oh my goodness. Well,
Including 10 years as a dean. And I'm also on the Columbia Funds board, and we merged during COVID, and we now oversee about $300 billion in assets. It's another full-time job.
yeah, I guess it is. Well, let me just say, I think on behalf of everybody, you've made a huge contribution to important things over the last 20 years, and I know your work will continue, but I want to thank you for tonight and thank you for all you've done for the past 20 years. Thanks so much,
Well,
both of you.
thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Staying in tune.
Yeah.
If you want to see the full report, you can find it online at thebostonclub.com. Or if you're a little short on time in the interim, you can check out Shirley Young's great piece in the Boston Globe.